It was 1943, and the battlefront was Eastern Europe, deep in territory occupied by German forces during the Great Patriotic War. The forest was cold and gray, the kind of morning that made every sound seem sharp and dangerous. A small patrol of Soviet scouts, sent far behind enemy lines, crept through the underbrush, their uniforms dusty and faces drawn. Their mission was to intercept a German courier and bring him back for interrogation. But fate, as it so often did in war, had different plans. As the patrol rounded a bend between two tall pines, they saw smoke rising against the soft morning light. At first it was just a thin trail, but soon the black plume grew wider, darker, like a wound on the horizon. Rifle butts clicked against straps, and the scouts froze, scanning through the trees. Then they heard distant shouts crackling through static, and what sounded like heavy boots marching over earth. Their lead scout raised his hand, the universal sign to halt. They watched in tense silence as a column of German soldiers, armed and merciless, marched toward a small village they could now see in the clearing. Smoke curled from chimneys and huts alike. The villagers were already running, screaming, clutching children, wagons overturned in rush and panic. But something else made their hearts tighten. On a patch of ground at the edge of the village stood two young girls. They were bound to a crude wooden frame, their clothes torn, their faces pale with fear. A German officer paced before them, pistol in hand. A firing squad waited. No one spoke. The only sound was the lumber of boots and the muffled sobs of the girls. "Partisans," breathed one of the scouts. The girls were barely older than teenagers. They had been captured a day ago by the punitive detachment, accused of aiding resistance fighters. The truth didn't matter here. Orders were clear. Villages that sheltered partisans were to be burned, and sympathizers executed. The patrol commander, Lieutenant Andreev, surveyed his men. They were outnumbered at least 5-1, deep in enemy territory, and lightly armed. A direct attack would be suicide, but to do nothing, that was unthinkable. Andreev looked at the youngest scout, Petrov, his eyes flicking back to the girls. "We must distract them," he said quietly, knowing he sounded mad even to himself. "Distract them? How?" someone whispered. And then they saw him, Sergei Volkov. In civilian life before the war, Volkov had been part of a traveling circus troupe, a performer, an acrobat, a man who once made crowds gasp with daring feats of balance and showmanship. In the army he rarely spoke of those days, but now Andreev had an idea rooted in that past. Volkov stepped forward, breath visible in the cold air, and without waiting for orders, began to untie a small bundle from his pack. The others watched as he opened it, revealing a set of juggling pins and an old battered hat. Things that seemed absurd here, among rifles and fear. Something about Volkov's presence changed in that moment, as if he was shaking off the dust of battle and slipping back into an old familiar role. He moved into the clearing, unprotected, his back to the trees, where German guards could see him clearly. There was a moment of stunned silence from everyone. Then a German corporal pointed, yelling orders. The officer barking commands turned his head, startled by this lone figure stepping toward them. Volkov began to juggle. At first it was simple, the wooden pins spinning through the air, catching the light as though they were sparks. The German soldiers stared, bewildered, their rifles lowering slightly in astonishment. Volkov didn't stop there. He flipped, spun, twisted his body with the grace of an artist long practiced. A difficult stunt, this one, a back flip into a crouch, pin still in motion. A laugh escaped his lips, sharp and clear. Germans blinked, some even smiled, unable to reconcile this bizarre spectacle with the grim task they were about to carry out. But the danger was real. Every movement he made drew more attention. What was a trick under normal circumstances now held the enemy's focus. Some guards laughed, some cursed in confusion, but their eyes were on Volkov, their rifles aimed at the air instead of the girls. In that moment of distraction, Andreev gave the signal. Two of the scouts slipped from cover, moving swiftly and silently through the grass. Bullets began to crack over Volkov's head as German soldiers finally realized what was happening. But they were too late. The scouts reached the girls, cutting their bonds and pulling them toward the tree-line. The younger one cried out, bewildered by the sudden movement, but the scouts hushed them, pushing them back toward safety. Volkov's performance grew wilder as the firefight intensified. He dodged bullets with a dancer's grace, rolling and flipping, driving the German focus entirely on his figure swinging and darting across the clearing. A pistol shot rang out and he fell, but he had done his job. The girls were disappearing into the woods, guided by the others alive. Lieutenant Andreev fired the signal flare. It arced into the sky and burst in a bloom of red fire. Somewhere in the forest, other partisan fighters heard the call and began closing in on the Germans' rear. Chaos erupted. When the smoke cleared and the Germans were driven back, the scouts regrouped below a stand of pines. The girls were safe. They clutched one another, trembling but alive. Andreev looked toward the clearing where Volkov had fought. He did not walk back. He did not wave. He simply looked once, eyes steady, and turned away, his figure swallowed by the trees. That night, by the fire, the girls whispered their thanks. The scouts nodded, exhausted. Outside the circle of light, shadows danced among the trees, and far off, the distant echo of battle faded into silence. They were all survivors of war now, each bearing memories no one should ever have to hold, but they carried them anyway. And somewhere deep in their hearts, they knew that courage did not always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wore the faded costume of a circus performer, and sometimes it died so others could live.